How about the funeral service for your grandmother? Was that in German at the time?
Yes, in those days everything was German. Yeah. Your masses were in Latin. Your sermons and everything were in German. That only changed in the 60s after Vatican II.
Let's talk a little bit about religion while we're talking here. How important was religion to your parents and your family when you were growing up?
Number one, I'd say.
How often did you go to church?
Every Sunday. Unless we were snowbound south of Bravo. Other than that, it's...
Did you go to church in Allen? Or?
Yes.
Okay. And how far of a commute was that?
10 miles.
So when you were snowbound, it was...
It was, you just couldn't get there sometimes. It was impossible. You had very stormy weather.
What time did church services usually start back then?
Oh, 10 in the morning, 10 in the morning, 8 in the morning, and 10 in the morning.
So if you had 10 miles to go and you were going probably by horses, I imagine,
yeah.
How long would it take you to get there?
Oh, a few hours.
Okay.
So what we usually would do, we would go to Grandma's the day before. You'd stay overnight. You go to church and you come home the next day.
Okay. And you said that the church services were in German and Latin.
Yes, because your Mass was in Latin, your homily was in German. Because your priests were also German.
Okay.
You had a German settlement, so they made sure that everything was German.
Okay. What type, when you walked in, how were people seated in the church?
Oh, it used to be men on one side, women on the other. But then they changed it, and they sat the way they wanted to sit.
Do you know about what year that the seating changed?
Probably after the war, I guess.
The war.
Yeah, oh, yeah. I guess from the beginning they used to do those things, yeah.
Where did children sit?
They usually sat with their parents.
Okay.
We sat with our parents. Or else they sent us way ahead.
Can you tell me about some of the religious activities that you would participate in when you were a child?
Well, it wasn't the way it is now. There'd be things like days the church would have picnics and things, and all the families would get together, and basically that's the way it was. Other than that, you didn't have that kind of... it's not the same as anymore as the way it was then. Everybody went home. Everybody had lots to do at home. So basically you went to church, you went home. You didn't sit for coffee like we do nowadays all afternoon in our churches. But because there's a lot of social gatherings we have nowadays, which they don't, which they didn't have, after Mass. They just didn't have the time. And some people had such large families, they just took the older kids. They didn't bother with the little ones because they couldn't even accommodate them all. Not even with the car, they couldn't have enough room for all their kids.
In your family, how did it work? Did all the children go?
Yeah, we all did.
What would you wear to church?
Oh, we all dressed up for church. Church was something you were dressed up for.
And what about hats? Was that
We wore
common?
hats. The hats went till the 60s.
Okay.
Then the hats went out.
Okay. You mentioned church picnics. Where would they have these church picnics?
We had a hall beside the church in Ellen. And then they'd have, the food was prepared inside. There'd be ball games, things outside. The kids would play games. And it was time to eat. We'd all go in, have our lunch, and everything was cleaned up afterwards. In the evening time, we'd all go home. Yeah.
How about, do you remember your first communion?
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I was 9 years old. My sister was 8, and my brother was 7. And we all three made our first communion together. Because they believed in children being much older than they do nowadays. So we all made our first communion together. Went to catechism, which was the custom in those days. 2 weeks every summer in the summer holidays, you went to a place, the nuns taught catechism. You went there for 2 weeks. That was your religious experience for the year. And that's where you were taught how to do First Communion. That's how you taught for confirmation. That's how it went.
So were those 2 weeks like? Were you actually staying with the nuns?
No, my dad drove us in.
Okay.
No, the nuns lived in a convent. Nobody stayed with them.
Okay.
Either that or you stay with a relative in town or close by.
And what would you do during catechism classes?
There were classes just like a regular school day from 9 to 3:30.
So did you have homework that you would have to do in the evening?
Yes, we did.
Well?
We had to learn our, had to learn your prayers, your commandments, that stuff.
And what about confirmation? What was that
That's
like?
the same thing. You just went in there, and it was a different class because you were taking a different sacrament. So.
And how old were you when you were confirmed?
12.
12 when you were confirmed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is still, but it's being changed now.
We were just talking about church, so and we finished with confirmation. So let's talk about some of the religious practices you would participate in, such as like the rosary.
Yeah, that was something that was usually prayed every night. My grandmother was she was for that every night. If you were at her house, everybody had to say the rosary. We all got together.
How would the rosary work? I wasn't raised in a Catholic church, so I'm not sure much on that. So what would you do for praying to the rosary?
The rosary is a string of beads, and you pray them,
Okay.
There's a prayer on every bead. It takes about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, not exactly long.
Okay. And that would be something that your family would do every evening?
My family did it too. It was a custom my mother continued.
Okay. What about praying before meals? Was that something?
Very much so, before meals and after meals.
Okay. And then before bedtime?
Before bedtime, morning prayers, evening prayers.
Okay. I've interviewed some Catholics that have had like a Christ corner. Was that something in your family as well?
Not so much. More my husband's mother more or less did that, but we all had. It was like the pictures. The house, most of your pictures that were hanging were either of family members or of saints. That's what they do. My grandmother's house is full of those kind of pictures.
Something that I'm learning more and more about as I do this project is names days.
Yes.
Was that practiced?
Very, very much. My grandmother and grandfather had their names day. 3rd of December was Francis's grandpa's name's day. 25th of November was grandma's name's day. They were celebrated.
How would you celebrate a name's day?
Grandma's name's day in November was for the family, the children. So we'd all go to grandma's house for her name's day. Then the 3rd of December, she had grandpa's name's day. And that's when their brothers and sisters and their nieces and nephews and everybody would come. You'd have these huge suppers because they were in the fall, so of course you had all your chicken, whatnot, all. And then they'd play cards all night long. They would sit for hours, the men, playing cards. They just loved that. And of course, being there was a lot of relatives, they all had the names of saints. So there was a names day almost every other week. They'd travel around, especially in the wintertime. They'd travel from one place to the next and they'd celebrate them. That was their kind of get-together. There was nothing else, really, in the communities other than these family get-togethers.
You mentioned that they would play cards. What type of card games were they playing?
They'd probably play whist. Yeah.
Okay, here. Were these get-togethers, was alcohol present at them?
Not really. There was lots of good cooking, lots of good baking, lunches all night long.
Were these something that took place instead of birthdays, or would birthdays also...
Basically, yes. Birthdays was more or less just your family. A child had a birthday, well, okay. Or grandma's birthday, we'd bring grandma a present. But it really wasn't like the names day, The names day was like a special day.
Was that something that was continued with your siblings and you, that you would be named after saints?
No. Okay. My mother liked to pick names, yes, but I don't think mine's really, that they're really... You like to keep a name that has a nice name. Because I know my daughter now, she's naming her kids with quite the names. Like Alexandria. Yeah.
So when you were growing up, names days, was that something that that adults celebrated?
Adults celebrated, yeah. Children didn't celebrate that, no. But they all like to keep the names, within the... A lot of it was named after parents, grandparents. They chose names like if the grandfather's name was, as you can see, the grandfather was Frank, the father was Frank, the son was Frank. They like to carry on that name. They wanted this, it's sort of a tradition thing, and they were very offended if none of the grandchildren had the name.
So is there somebody in your family that has
My youngest brother's called Michael. My dad was called Mike.
Okay.
Yeah. And his son, Michael, my brother's son now is also a Michael.
Okay.
So there's 3 Michaels.
When you were growing up, what was your favorite holiday?
I don't know, I guess all of us kids like Christmas. I can't remember it any different than everybody waiting for get presents.
Tell me a little bit about what Christmas was like back then.
Oh, Christmas was, when we were little, it was at Grandma's. We'd go to Grandma's, we'd stay up there, Mom and Dad would go to midnight mass. Grandma made us a big feather bed on the floor, and us kids would sleep there, and they'd go to church, and then they'd come home, and then the next day was Christmas, we'd get some presents. Nothing fancy, a lot of it, was just little things that Grandma picked up, but we had lots of goodies. Grandma had a huge Christmas supper, and then she gave us, when we went home, she made everybody this big bunch of candies and nuts and everything. And so we always got a lot more goodies from Grandma than we did from Mom and Dad.
You mentioned presents, they would just be something little.
Yeah.
Can you give me some examples?
Like a little doll for us, or a little train for my brother, or a little truck or something, Because toys, were kind of basic.
And the goodies, what type of goodies? Were they home-baked goodies?
Oh, there were lots of chocolate candies and lots of peanuts and stuff, lots of stuff that kids liked and didn't get too much over the year.
Did you have a Christmas tree?
Yes, we did. And my grandmother had a nicer one because she had those real German candles that you put on the tree. She had those.
Never caught on fire?
Well, they were very careful. My aunt supervised.
What else would you use to decorate?
Well, they had decorations, just little glass balls and trinkets and things that were put on the tree. Yeah. Yeah.
How about stockings? Did you hang stockings for Christmas?
Not really. We put out more or less a little container, and that's where we got our stuff in. Okay. Actually, we were quite big containers. We got lots of stuff.
When you mentioned midnight mass, it sounded like the children didn't go. That was something that.
Well, we were all younger yet at that time, so our parents, they would all get together, get in a sleigh, and go over there. And of course, it's midnight; it's cold, so the kids were usually left with someone to watch them, more or less, babysit them, and my grandparents and my mother and dad, and those would go to church. Yeah.
So, how old were you when you started going to midnight mass?
When I was maybe about 10 or 11.
Okay. Do you remember what midnight mass was like?
Oh yeah, it really hasn't changed much. Only things we have it earlier nowadays. Not exactly midnight, but it was at midnight, and it was beautiful. Every church was decorated, and all your nativity sets were up, and it was 2:00 in the morning until you got out of there.
Oh my goodness. Christmas supper, was that different than a typical supper?
Well, yeah, you'd have your big turkey and chicken and whatnot. They believed because there were a lot of people, it was like a big supper. There was a lot of variety.
So since you stayed at your grandparents, you obviously had your grandparents involved in the Christmas celebration. Yeah. Were aunts and uncles involved? Was this like...
Oh, well, yes, because they all came home to Grandma's house, But then I was 12 years old when she passed away, so a lot of my uncles weren't married yet. Okay. And they would have been there because they were at home, but there were no children yet. Because a lot of my cousins are younger than I am, so.
How about in school? How was Christmas celebrated? Was that something that...
That was a Christmas pageant. There was a Christmas pageant put on in the local schools. Country schools did it, local schools did it. I guess they all did it in those days. If you watch a Western movie, you're basically watching the story of the way the people lived. I mean, it's pretty well too real. They'd have the Christmas pageants, and it'd be a whole night, and Santa Claus would come in and give a package, with candies and stuff to all the kids that were there.
So Santa Claus, was that a pretty big thing for children?
Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. Santa Claus was what everybody waited for Santa. Yeah.
Did you? Something that we do today is put out milk and cookies. Is that something that kids did
no,
then?
we didn't. No. Kids do. My kids did. The others do now, but no, they didn't. Okay. Those are all customs that came along later on. Actually, through songs, I think that were sung. Cookies. I think some of them were following the songs of the movies on television.
What about Easter? How did you celebrate
Easter was a big, long story because you have 3 days. Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and the Saturday, Sunday. It's changed to what's called a Triduum nowadays. But in those days, you went to church on the Thursday, you went to church on the Friday, just like nowadays. And then it was Easter Sunday. You went Sunday mornings, and nowadays we have it on Saturday nights.
Oh.
It's changed. These religions changed through. But anyway, it's a 3-day affair, and it's long.
Was that pretty hard for your family to do, living 10 miles from Allen?
It was very, very difficult when we were little because sometimes it all depends. If Easter was early in the springtime, sometimes the roads were impassable. Until later on when the roads got better, of course, it wasn't a problem. But, and same thing with Easter. We'd go to Grandma's. For Easter Sunday, there was this big supper. Everybody was there, the whole family. Grandma gave us a lot of goodies, colored a lot of eggs. She'd have this great big dish like this full of colored eggs because she had hens that laid well. And we loved that. We got lots of goodies and lots of chicken eggs and Easter egg hunt and that kind of stuff. It was like fun.
So was the Easter Bunny a concept?
Oh yeah, we waited for the bunny. And we were getting skeptical until one day we came in and Grandpa Beckler was there and he said, you know, when I came down last night, Mr. and Mrs. Rabbit were sitting there and they were coloring eggs. And of course, when Grandpa Beckler told that, who was a person who didn't make up stories, you know, I guess we kids believed like you wouldn't believe.
Only the truth from Grandpa.
Well, yeah, you know, he's the kind of grandfather he was. It was only the truth from Grandpa.
What about some of the common things that we think of today, like the tooth fairy and things like that?
No,
Were those common?
no.
Okay.
No.
How about Thanksgiving? Was that celebrated?
Oh, yeah.
Then?
Oh, yeah, everybody, we had it, but that was just strictly, you know, our family alone, you know, we'd have our Thanksgiving supper. A lot of times people were still harvesting too. Because it's in October, you have it in November. Mm-hmm. So, of course, beginning of October, that's not surprising for us to be still harvesting. So a lot of times we were still harvesting, but we still have the big Thanksgiving supper.
So would you kind of have it like a harvest celebration?
Yeah, it was kind of a thing, yeah. Whoever was there, whoever was helping along, everything was involved. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we still had somebody helping us or something, and then everybody would be there for supper. Sometimes people would come, someone you knew, maybe a relative or something would show up, and everybody would be welcome. It would be kind of a thing, yeah.
What about July 1st? Was that something that you guys
That
did?
is usually done in the local towns.
Okay.
Canada Day is always celebrated, called Dominion Day, now it's called Canada Day. But it was always celebrated in the local towns. It still is. We still went to Brattle this year. We usually go out to Brattle, where I came from. And then they have a flag raising, pancake breakfast, that kind of thing, parade. It's the kind of a thing that's, like I say.
Did they have games and things for kids to do when you were growing up?
On Canada Day, yes, the towns always had, they usually had some kind of a day, you know, where you had ball games and races and whatnot all, yeah.
Did you participate in some of
Yeah,
those?
oh yeah. Because our school, went to school there, so you went to the Canada Day things there, yeah.
Okay. Are there any other types of celebrations or holidays that you can remember from your childhood that we didn't talk about?
Not really. As far as school went, you celebrated like Valentine's Day. You'd have a Valentine party, you know, you'd have a Halloween party. We'd have lunches in the school. Kids would dress up in costumes, kind of thing. More so than we have nowadays. Nowadays, it's mostly the little kids in the school.
So you mentioned the Halloween costumes. Were they homemade costumes?
It was all homemade stuff, yeah. Everybody. Or some kids just dug out whatever they could and dressed up in something weird just so they'd be in sync with everybody else.
And Valentine's Day, were those like homemade Valentines?
Oh, yeah. Everybody was bringing either cookies and stuff, and teacher would make hot chocolate and that kind of stuff. And we'd give everybody Valentines, you know, the kids made homemade Valentines. Or you could purchase them. We purchased them a lot of times and send all the kids got Valentines. It was just kind of a day, you know, out for everybody.
Well, let's end with talking about your parents for a little bit. What type of a person was your father's name was Michael, right?
Yeah.
What type of a person was your father?
Oh, he was great. He was a great person. He told us a lot about his life growing up in Russia and in Canada. He spoke a lot. That's how come I knew, you know, when he was telling how the things he did when he was living in Russia. And about his uncles, how he liked his uncles. He was really fond of them. He really missed them because a lot of them did not come to Canada.
Was he a strict father or affectionate?
Sort of between. He wasn't really that strict. He wasn't over affectionate. He was just a typical father from that era. Yeah.
Were you close to him when you were growing up?
We were. Yeah, very much so.
What type of things did you do with your father?
We did a lot of work with him. He always found us something to do. Many a time we'd be out hoeing potatoes and stuff, and he'd be with us hoeing. He'd be with us bringing the bales in. He'd help us stack the bales and everything. Milking the cows, he'd be there. He'd be helping us.
And how about your mother? What type of a person was she?
She was a happy person, but a little bit. I found my mother a little bit more reserved. She was a really good mother. She wasn't the same as her mother. Her mother was a bouncier mother, or happier mother, but she herself. She wasn't as fond of gardening and things as we did a lot of that, as her mother was. And I guess I inherited from my grandmothers, because I loved gardening myself.
Was she a strict mother?
Not really. No, not really. She was.
How about affectionate? Was she an affectionate mother?
She was not really too affectionate. She was just your normal kind of mother. She was good to you. She did things with you. She played with us. Actually, when I was small, remembering back, she was a happier person when I was a little girl than she was later on in life, especially after my dad passed away. He passed away in 1961, so she was away for 30 years. And it had an effect on her. She was never quite as happy a person after that.
When you were growing up, how would you say your mom and dad interacted with each other? Did they have a good, solid?
Yeah, they had a good relationship. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, there was no problem there. No. They worked together side by side. Yeah.
Did when one of the children misbehaved, who would be the one that would punish the children?
Sometimes Mom did. Sometimes she left it for Dad.
And what type of punishment discipline was typical back then?
I don't know. A lot of times it was a slap on the butt or a slap in the ear. That was more or less the way they operated in those days.
We had talked a little bit about affection. Were they the type to give their children hugs, or was that not a common thing back then?
It wasn't that common. It wasn't that common. No.
When you were at home, did you speak German with your parents or English?
I spoke German as a little girl until I went to school, and then we learned to speak English, so we spoke both German and English.
So your mom and dad could speak English then pretty well?
Oh yeah, very much so. My mother, being born in this country, had no problem. Went to school over here and everything.
But she also knew German then fairly well.
Very
too.
much so, because they also taught German. They also had to go to German school.
Okay. Okay. And how many children did your parents have again?
There's 6 in our family.
6 children. Okay. And there was one thing that's a good discussion on your parents. There was one thing that you checked that we haven't talked about, and that was World War II. So we'll get a discussion on how World War II affected life for you.
Now, my mother had 3 brothers and 2 brother-in-laws, all in the services in the Second World War. And, of course, it was extremely hard on my mother. It was very hard on my grandmother. 2 of them. There's 3 who are still living. 1 brother-in-law. 2 brothers are living yet of my mother's. And 1 brother-in-law and 1 brother passed away. Actually, my 1 brother, a war vet, he lives just south of Allen. His name is Gregor Beckler. And we have just found out what his decorations were for. Georgina wanted to know what he had received his medals for. And I guess he has just written and gotten the information. So I'm curious to see. I'm going to have to go out and visit him and see. He can't get around very much because he's on oxygen all the time. But they were all in the wars. They trained in Dundurn, and then they were shipped to BC. They were stationed, I think, in Nanaimo. And Uncle Gregor and Uncle Charlie were both overseas. They were in England, then they were in Holland. According to Way, he wrote a small little blurb here not long ago. I don't know where Georgina put that. About where all the places he had been stationed was. And I know he was in the Aleutians when the Canadians sent soldiers in, because the Americans didn't have enough forces to occupy the Aleutian Islands in the Second World War. I know that he was one of the soldiers stationed in the Aleutians. But but my grandmother, every night I can remember my mother listening to the radio, and there'd be a report every night on the missing or killed in action. And every night, they'd say, no, their name is not among them. Their name is not among them. And I know my grandparents, my mother writing a letter every day to every one of her brothers, sending care packages over to them. They looked forward to the care packages that they got.
Were they drafted?
My mother's brothers, yes. One of my brother-in-laws, my dad's sister's husband, he was a volunteer. My mother's sister's husband, he was drafted. He lives here in Saskatoon. Yeah.
How did life change here in Canada?
Very much so. Because at first they were all volunteers. And, it was a little bit different when you volunteer than if you're drafted. But some of these people were reluctant to be drafted into the services. But being there was no other choice, they were all gone. But they were all just farm boys, 18, 19 years old, young guys. Knew absolutely nothing about the military. And they were taken, they were trained, they were sent overseas. And I guess it was an experience they will never forget. They didn't like talking about it for a long time, but now I find they're slowly, you can hear all the vets are starting to talk, and this is the first time Uncle Gregor, who was so tight-lipped that you could get him, is starting really to talk about it nowadays.
Do you remember if there were some of the things that I've heard about in the States are rationing and things like that?
Yes. Everything was in coupons. Everybody had a coupon book. Sugar was rationed, coffee was rationed, tea was rationed, gasoline was extremely rationed. A farmer could get gasoline for a truck. You were only allowed X number of gallons for a car. Cars had a ceiling price set when you bought them. You couldn't sell anything above the ceiling price. Everything had to be registered with the government. Everybody had to have registration papers. Police could stop anybody on the road and ask for their registration papers as soon as you were 16 years old. And I know,
Did when you have to register for the draft, did girls have to do that as well as
no,
boys?
there was only men in those days. In the Second World War, there were no. Well, there were women in the services, but they were more or less in the nursing or whatever, the support services. They were not part of the. That only came later, I think, in the States too, didn't it?
Girls still don't have to register in the States.
They don't have to. Oh, they don't, because I know. Okay.
But they have to register up here now in Canada?
No.
Women, okay.
No, women don't. It's optional, but a lot of women prefer to go in the military.
Okay. Is there anything else about World War II and life that you wanted to...
Well, they were gone for many years. I remember many a time you didn't hear from anybody. All of a sudden you get a letter from an altogether different country or place, because they weren't allowed to say where they were going or what was going to happen. And all of a sudden you'd hear, well, I haven't heard anything, what's going on? People were worried. And all of a sudden they get a letter all of a sudden from England or Holland or wherever they were stationed. And we're over here now. And I know he was a guard in a prisoner of war camp, one of my uncles. And I guess it was quite an experience, he said. Well, guarding, they were all German prisoners they were guarding. He doesn't like to speak about it. We're trying to get some of the facts from him nowadays. He slowly talks about it. They were so happy, when they get home. Actually, when they go home, they all got married. They all had girlfriends waiting for them. And They'd come on leave, they'd all come and visit. They'd be at my mom's house for days. They'd stay there sometimes for a while. They'd help my dad with the harvest if they could. They could get a leave to help the farmers harvest. So they'd get a leave to help my dad harvest.
You mentioned that it was two of your mother's brothers, right? Two of your uncles that served?
My mother had 3 brothers in the military.
Okay. Was one of them Wilford?
No,
Okay.
Wilford was too young.
Okay.
Actually, Uncle Wilford will be able to tell you more about the military part because he was actually turning 18 just at the time at the end of the war. He just missed out on it. Yeah, he just missed out on it, yeah.
That'll be a good one to talk with him about.
Tony didn't go overseas, but Uncle Charlie and Uncle Gregor were the ones that were overseas. He'd probably know more, and he would be able to obtain more information about it too, because he would just ask his brother, what was what, yeah.
Okay.
Very easy to find out.
Well, I'll ask a couple concluding questions on your childhood,
Yeah.
and then we'll look at the pictures.
Mm-hmm.
What was the most adventurous childhood? What is your most adventurous childhood memory?
I don't know. It was a pretty simple childhood. There weren't too many big adventures. We'd visit a few aunts sometimes, or go. I remember once going to Waskasoo, which was nice. We enjoyed going up there. Other than that, I can't really say that there was anything too exciting.
Okay. How about the scariest childhood experience?
Scariest? I don't know. I can't remember ever being really scared of anything.
And do you have in particular a happy moment in your childhood that really stands out?
I've never even thought of that. There were things in our childhood when we had get to get things we were looking forward to, like maybe a special birthday or like I say, Christmas or something that we want, waiting for a special gift that we hope we would get, and being excited about it. Other than that, it's not the same as it is nowadays. Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else about your childhood that we haven't talked about today that you would like to discuss?
No, I can't think of anything really.
Okay. And then why did you want to participate in this project today?
Well, I thought it would be nice to get it down so that my kids or grandchildren would someday be able to know more about where their ancestors came from, where they grew up. Because a lot of children don't know much about. I know my husband doesn't know much about on his side of the family. He doesn't know hardly anything. He knows his mother's, but not his dad's. And that's kind of unfortunate.
Go ahead. Who do we have in this picture?
This would be my great-great-grandparents. And that would be their family.
Okay, so where...
One of them was my great-grandfather. His name was Franz. Would have to be on here, Franz. Mm-hmm.
So left to right, Andrew, Jacob, and Franz. Andrew, Jacob, and Franz.
Yeah, so he looks like some of my brother's kids.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm guessing since this is your
yeah, this is the Beckler.
Okay.
Yeah,
and I'm guessing you never really got to know your great.
No, well, they were not living anymore, They were living in Russia or Germany probably. Yeah, they would have been in Germany.
Okay.
Yeah. And this then is my great-grandfather and great-grandmother.
And these are the ones that immigrated from Russia.
They are the ones who immigrated from Russia to the United States, yes.
Okay.
And then up to Canada.
Do you remember what year you said that they immigrated?
1890.
Okay. Okay.
And this is then my grandfather.
And this is the grandfather that was kind of the son.
Yeah.
You didn't get to know this one, right?
No, this is the one I got to know.
Oh.
This was my mother's dad.
Okay.
He's the one who lived in Allen. He's the one who homesteaded in Allen. We're the one who lived in the States, yes.
He was the one that spoke the truth.
Yes, he was. He spoke the truth, yeah.
Do you remember any other times where you were with your grandfather that we haven't talked about? Other memories?
I don't know. He'd talk about grandma. He'd talk about how when they were farming and how, what kind of a life they had. The first house, they lived in a sod house, and then how they moved on to and built another house, and then later on they built the big house. He'd talk about how they built the house and the barn, and how his grandmother and dad, and how he talked a lot about how they lived out here, how hard it was. They couldn't get anywhere all winter long. The closest town was Dundurn. And in order to do that, it was a few-day trip. They had to go there one day, stay overnight, get their supplies, then come back the next day. And if the winter was long, they started to run out of supplies. They started to have problems.
You said that they lived in a sod house.
In a little house, yeah.
How many children did they have when they were living in the sod house?
He was the only one.
Okay.
My grandmother, he had 2 sisters. One died in the States when she was 6 years old from scarlet fever. One of her friends, there was a scarlet fever epidemic in the Dakotas, and she went to visit her friend, and she got scarlet fever, and she died. Luckily, he didn't get it. And then he had another sister, but she died after she was just a few days old, because his mother always said she used to have her laying out behind the stooks. That's still in the Dakotas. When they were harvesting, you know, she'd help him in the fields, because the wives worked in the fields with their husbands. So he was the only one that survived. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And that was my grandmother, his wife.
Okay.
And that was her brother, Uncle Tony, Aunt Julia, Aunt Ida, and Uncle Jake.
And this is the grandparents' house that you would stay at for Christmas.
This is not this how this picture was taken in the Dakotas.
Okay.
That was before she came to Canada.
Okay.
Her brothers and sisters were all born there. And Uncle Jake actually when he moved back to the States, he died in the States a couple of years ago.
Did you ever, did you get to know your Uncle Jake?
Yes, I knew them all.
And
Ida and Aunt Julia and those all lived here.
Can you tell me a little bit about your Uncle Jake and the children?
He had no children.
Okay.
He had no children. He lived in Allen, and then when he moved back to the States, and he would come once in a blue moon to visit. We'd get to see him talk a little bit, but I never really got to know him. My mother and dad knew him well, but I didn't really get to know him that much. The aunts, yes, I did. They were living here. Their nieces and nephews, their grandchildren, that some of them go to church with me, and that I know their families well. And Uncle Tony Seltzer too.
Who is this one here?
And Ida.
And who is this one?
That's Aunt Julia.
What was Ida like when you were a child?
She was a very nice little lady, a very friendly little lady. My mother spent a lot of time with her when she was young. Okay. She died a long, long time ago. And Aunt Julia, well, did too. She lived in Allen. She was kind of a high-strung lady, very particular, very... So, and Uncle Tony Seltzer, these were half-sisters. Her mother died in childbirth.
Okay.
And she and her brother were left behind. The baby died, the mother died. My grandfather went down to the States, and he looked for in the cemetery. But you know, after all these years, the crosses and everything. So he found the cemetery, but he could not find exactly where the grave of where her mother was. She was buried with the baby in a cemetery down there, yeah. He looked for the place where they lived. There was just the foundation of the house where they had lived. I remember in the 50s when he drove down with one of my uncles and started to look for all that. So anyway, that's where she was.
Okay.
This is their wedding picture, my grandma and grandpa's.
Oh. Were they were married
in Allen in St. Aloysius Church, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's their wedding picture.
So that church in Allen, that's also was that where your parents were married?
I was married in that church. My kids were all baptized in that church, yeah.
And you were baptized in that church probably?
All of us, yeah. I guess the whole relationship. My brothers and sisters, everybody. Yeah, they were all baptized in that church.
So that church has a lot of family history.
Yeah, well, that church is the second church. There was an original church, and this one was built in 1921, I think, that church.
Okay.
Yeah, and I remember grandfather and those and my dad talking that they helped to haul the stone, like the bricks and stuff to help. And they all did, it was community bee raising kind of thing. They all built that church. That's what they did in those days. Everything was done together.
So this wedding picture here, when you think back to your grandparents, I asked you, about your mother and father's marriage.
Yeah.
How about them as a couple?
Oh, my grandfather was devoted to my grandmother. She doted on him. Everything he wanted, he got. And when she passed away, he was a widower for 25 years. I tell you, that was very hard on him. He had a heck of a time accepting that. It took a lot of changing on his part. Because if he wasn't feeling good, she would make sure that he wouldn't go to a hospital or anything without her there. She'd sit in Saskatoon. She'd be there every day. Everything that he needed, she just catered to him day and night. She was very devoted to him. She was 19 when she married him. So.
And how old was your father?
Oh, my grandfather? He was probably about 24 or something. He wasn't that old, yeah. He was, yeah, 4 years older than her.
Okay.
4 years older than her. Because he born in 1884, she in 1888.
So the outfits that they're wearing, was that something that was...
That was the traditional wedding gown, dresses, yeah, that they wore in those days.
Okay.
It was only afterwards. I think my mother was the first one to wear a long white dress. Before that, they'd wear short white dresses and things, but my mother was the first one, she said, who went to the church there to wear the long white dress.
Huh, interesting. So did your mother say whether or not that was more of the American trend, or
I think it was
American trend, or was it a trend in...
I think it was a North American trend. I think that was just the way things evolved as we moved along the course of civilization in this country.
Okay.
That was a picture of them when they were first out here. That was their first baby. My grandma and grandpa and his mother. That was taken on their homestead. So that was a picture.
And the baby is...
His Uncle Frank.
Uncle Frank?
Frank, yeah, of course, he had to be the first son. He had to be called Frank.
So what was Uncle Frank like when you were a kid?
Oh, he was a nice guy. He was my godfather. And he had a family of 10 kids. And he was a very nice person, though. Very friendly person, very good to talk to. Very philosophical man, you know. He was involved in a lot of municipal, government things around the country, looking in the municipalities, the towns, this kind of stuff. School boards, that kind of stuff. That was their picture. That was their horse, and that was her little colt. He was the first one. Oh, that's quite a picture.
That's a telling picture.
Yeah, their history. Like we have the museum up here, and in that you have so much of this stuff, the WDM. Now this is my mother and her three of her sisters.
Okay. Which one's your mother?
This one.
Okay.
They were all three dressed alike. All four of them dressed alike.
And who is this right here?
This is her older sister. Her name is Wilhelmina.
Okay. What was Wilhelmina like when you...
Just like my grandmother. These three all were nuns.
Really?
Yes. They were all three teachers. She was a grade 1 teacher all her life. She was just the best grade 1 teacher anybody could have. Kids just loved her. Sister Regina Ann, she was a high school teacher, and she was the elementary teacher.
Okay. So would you get to see them often when you...
Oh yeah, I was very close to these aunts. Awful close. They were always here. If they got a chance to have a holiday, they were here. They'd stay at my mom's over the summer, and they'd take classes at the university.
Okay.
Oh yeah, they love that. Oh yeah.
So why did your mom not become a nun?
For some reason or other, I don't know, she just didn't become. Her next sister became a nun, and then her younger sister got married.
Okay.
Two. So there were 2 married and 2 were nuns. One is still living. I saw her, she's going to be 90 years old. Sister Catherine, she's a couple of years younger than Mom. She was here in Lumsden for a retreat, and I and my 2 sisters went down to visit her.
Oh,
yeah, so it was really nice. And, and this is my grandma and grandpa. And she must have been about 60 and he about 64 on there.
1948. So
Yeah.
this is taken sometime during your childhood. This
is in 1948. This was taken at the time when Sister Catherine, which was, Catherine on the back, it's not on the other side because she was the younger sister. She was a missionary for 21 years in India and Pakistan. Well, it's called Bangladesh and all this place. She was over there for 21 years. And when she left, they had pictures, and then they took this picture of Grandma and Grandpa. Yeah.
So you really didn't get to know your the youngest sister. What was her name again?
Catherine, yeah, but she's back. She's the one we went to visit now.
Yeah.
But when she came back, we spent a lot of time with her. Oh, yeah, she's really, because I was her favorite niece, because I was one of the first nieces, to be born. And then I spent a lot of time with her when I was a little kid before she went as a nun. Yeah. Okay. Now George this is Mom and Dad's wedding picture.
Oh, okay.
Like I say, she was the first one with the white wedding gown.
Was she the first one in her family to get married?
No, her brother Frank.
Okay.
The one who had, I don't know what Georgina's got all in here.
And they were married in Canada, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, my mom was born in Canada. My dad came over in 1911. They were married in 1937.
And you were born in 1938?
38, yeah.
So,
yeah.
Okay.
That was their wedding picture. This is Grandma Kane. So Regina Carey. Beckler.
That's your great-grandmother?
That's my great-grandmother, yeah. This is my grandma and grandpa Dukart.
Okay.
Yeah. She was a Carey and he was a Dukart.
Okay. That's your mom's...
That's my dad's parents.
Dad's parents, okay.
Okay. And these are the plots in the cemetery.
Okay, so this is...
My grandma and grandpa Dukart, my dad's parents.
And will you tell us a little bit about them, why we have their picture on?
Yeah. She was my grandmother. She lived till 1961. And her I knew well. I spent some time with her. My grandpa Dukart I did not know because he passed away in 1935.
Okay.
Other than that, they came over here from Russia.
This is the grandmother that lived in the town of
Allen.
Allen,
Yeah. She's
okay.
the grandmother who lived in the town of Allen, yeah.
When you would go over and visit her, you said you would help her with some of the chores and stuff?
Some of the things, yeah, because I remember her helping. She painted her little house. She had a little house afterwards. She moved from a bigger house to a small one, so I and my Aunt Annie went over and we painted the house for her and stayed with her for a while. Or we'd go in and visit her for Christmas and bring her Christmas presents or take her out to our farm for Christmas.
When you would stay with her, where would you sleep? Did you have a room?
She had a little bedroom there for us with these big feather beds. We just loved those. They were so nice and comfy and warm, yeah.
Was she a good cook?
Excellent. Everybody in her family got diabetes when they got old.
Oh my goodness.
She was she herself did too. Because afterward, this is her picture. This is the family picture of my dad, his parents, and his sisters.
Oh.
And this was before they all went on diet, and you would have known they were the same people afterwards. They were like skinny as a rail afterwards. All the women.
So who's right here?
That would be Aunt Bertha.
Did you get to know your Aunt Bertha?
Yeah, she was my godmother.
What type of a person was she?
She was a good person, but kind of middle of the road, stern kind of person. Nothing too funny.
Kind of a German person?
Maybe, yes, yeah.
German.
Yeah.
And her?
That was Aunt Katie.
Okay, and what was she like?
She was, but I didn't know her too well because they moved to BC already when I was really small.
Okay.
This was Aunt Dad's dad.
That's Dad?
This is Aunt Lena. I knew she was a great person. We loved her because we liked the way she had clothes and everything. She was real kind of a fancy lady.
Did she have store-bought clothes? Or?
Oh yes, she worked in fashion for years. That was her thing.
So would you go over and dress up in her clothes and stuff?
Well, she lived in BC.
Oh.
She moved from here. She lived here for a while. And she went, but she'd always come in and visit.
Okay.
Every summer they'd be here for a while, so we'd always visit with her.
So would they stay with you when?
They'd stay at Grandma's house in Allen, yeah, and then they'd visit everybody.
Okay.
And then this is Aunt Annie.
Mm-hmm.
She died a long time ago too already. She lived in Allen. She was married. She had 4 children, and she was just a plain ordinary lady, just an ordinary housewife. And this was Aunt Annie Mary, the youngest one. Her husband was a volunteer, was one of the Dad's brother-in-laws who was in the war. He was in the Dieppe raid. And he was one of the soldiers who they picked up in the water when the Allies tried to cross in, and they didn't make it that time, the first one. And he was shell-shocked for years. All his life he suffered from that. As he died. He died from the suffering that he went through, the emotional and the physical and everything. Yeah.
So all of the girls have short haircuts. Was that something common back then?
Yes, they all did that in those days. But afterwards, then they all started. And she was a teacher. Like, she totally supported her daughter and son. Actually, I've really gotten to know her daughter now the last few years. Because her daughter has been trying to find out. Because they lived in Nanaimo, they didn't get much of a chance to get to know. So now her daughter lives in Edmonton, and my brother lives in Edmonton. And now she's come home, and we spent a lot of time together. Getting to really know each other, and getting her a chance to know her family. Because she really didn't know that much about her family history.
That's great.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.